It was just after midnight on a chilly winter evening when Chef Owen Harding stepped out onto the rooftop of his Surry Hills apartment and vanished. No footprints in the frost. No sounds echoing in the narrow Sydney streets below. Just a stillness so complete it felt like the city itself was holding its breath. 20 years have passed, and not a trace of Owen has ever been found. Not a body, not a witness. Only questions, thick as midnight fog, clinging to every brick of that rooftop, and a family left clinging to nothing but silence and fading hope. Owen Harding wasn't just any chef. He was a rising star in Sydney's fine dining scene, known for turning plates into poetry and kitchens into sanctuaries. His restaurant, Ember Ash, had earned whispers of a second hat by the Good Food Guide. But behind the fire's glow and the clinking of wine glasses, there were fractures. Friends remembered his eyes as stormy, even on sunny days, his laughter fading too quickly, like a song abruptly cut short. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, co-workers noticed small things. Forgotten orders, long, vacant stares, a sudden unease around corners and shadows. One night, he confided in a sous chef that he felt like someone was watching him. "Not in the street," he whispered, "but in my own home." That was 2 days before he walked to the rooftop and never came back down. Detective Sergeant Lena Parrish was fresh into her 30s when the Harding file crossed her desk, a missing person case already beginning to yellow at the corners. At first glance, it read like so many others. A man disappears without a trace, the world forgets to keep looking, but something wouldn't let go of her. It was the details or the lack of them that haunted her. No sign of forced entry, no evidence of flight. Nothing stolen. It was as if Owen had evaporated into the night sky, leaving only a faint scent of rosemary and smoke behind. When she visited Ember Ash for the first time, the restaurant had long since been closed, windows dust-veiled and gutted by time. A waitress from those days, older now, had met her at the locked front entrance. She didn't say much, but before she turned to go, she muttered just loud enough, "Some people think Owen jumped, but he was too careful for that." The words hung in the air like the hiss of a blown-out flame. The rooftop itself offered no answers, only more questions. A single iron ladder led up to its gravel-strewn surface, and the only surveillance camera positioned across the street had looped into static at precisely 12:03 a.m., the exact minute Owen was last seen. The footage before the glitch showed a still night, a flicker of movement on the rooftop, and then nothing. It haunted Lena, the way the air around Owen's final image seemed subtly warped, as though the universe itself had tugged at his outline, erased him with quiet intent. The coroner had ruled inconclusive. The media whispered, "Theory suicide, foul play, a lover's quarrel gone wrong." But Lena kept turning over the same detail that didn't belong. Owen's phone, found inside his locked apartment, still playing a soft recording of rain sounds on loop. Not nature sounds. Real rain he'd once recorded on his parents' farm in Tasmania. Hours of thunder, mist, and memory. Had he been trying to remember something or forget? The last known person to see Owen alive was his neighbor, Rita Nolan, a retired ballet dancer whose memory had grown brittle over the years, yet some details she could still recall with unsettling clarity. She remembered hearing footsteps above her ceiling, sharp and pacing, then a pause, then again. That rhythm, she said, was odd, too methodical, too tense. Rita claimed she opened her window for air just after midnight and glimpsed what she thought was Owen leaning against the ledge, face tilted skyward, like he was searching the stars for an answer only he could hear. He didn't look scared, she later told police, her voice trembling. He looked resigned, like someone who'd already said goodbye. Moments later, the rooftop was empty, no shadow, no silhouette, not even the creak of a closing door. And for Rita, the silence that followed was worse than any scream. Worse still was what she noticed the next morning, a small smear, barely visible, on the rooftop's corner wall. It looked like ash, and underneath it, smeared faintly across the stone, the outline of a handprint too slender to be Owen's, and facing downward, as though someone had tried to hold him back or push him forward. Years passed and Owen's name faded from tabloids to whispers, then to silence. But for his sister Mara, the rooftop never stopped screaming. Every winter she flew in from London, climbed those same iron rungs, stood where her brother had last been seen. He didn't fall, she once told a local reporter in 2011, her voice splintered by wind and grief. He was taken, or made to vanish. In her hands, she always brought the same item, his old chef's knife, engraved with the phrase, "Hold the fire." A running family joke or a deeply personal motto, no one could say for sure. What was certain is that Mara never accepted closure, and neither did Lena. Every year on the anniversary, the detective sat in her car outside the shuttered Ember Ash, engine idling, headlights off. And each year, like clockwork, she was never alone. A figure across the road, always in the shadows, never the same shape, sometimes tall, sometimes hunched, always still, always watching, never the same shape. She reported it once. The department shrugged it off, but she began keeping a file labeled in red. Watcher, returns annually, no face, no movement, only presence. In 2023, 2 full decades after Owen Harding's disappearance, the New South Wales police reopened the cold case with quiet reverence and a startling announcement: a $250,000 reward for any information leading to a breakthrough. Press cameras flashed. Leather shoes creaked on the courthouse floor. Mara Harding stood beside Detective Parrish. Older now, her hair a deeper shade of silver than memory recalled. The engraved chef's knife tucked inside her coat. Parrish's voice shook slightly as she addressed the assembled crowd. "We believe someone knows what happened that night," she said, "or saw something they didn't understand. It's time to speak." The room held its breath, just as it had 20 winters ago. But what stirred whispers wasn't the reward. It was what came next. The release of a newly uncovered audio file, buried within Owen's voice memos, time-stamped mere hours before his disappearance. A hushed, shaking whisper: "If this reaches anyone, I need you to know I didn't imagine it. It's real. It's in the walls." Then static, then nothing, as if, once again, the city had drawn a curtain over its secrets and swallowed Owen whole. The discovery of the audio file shifted everything. That single fragment of breath and dread sent tremors back through time. It wasn't just a whisper of fear, it was testimony, an echo of a man unraveling at the seams. Linguistic analysts scoured the recording, searching for background noise, inconsistencies, signs of duress. They found a low hum beneath Owen's voice, pulsing in uneven intervals. Some believed it was mechanical, a heater or fridge motor. Others weren't so sure. The hum rose in pitch at specific moments, almost responding to his panic. And then there was the silence that followed, not the absence of sound, but a void, too complete to be natural. Paranormal investigators, normally shunned by officials, came forward with decades-old notes. One entry read, "Rooftops on Commonwealth Street, veil thins in winter. One man gone." Another followed the voice and almost did not return. A chill crept into Lena's bones. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a story that had been whispered through walls, buried in rain, sealed in static. Something had always been hiding here, waiting. That winter, following the audio's release, Mara returned to Surry Hills once more, but this time she wasn't alone. A former Ember Ash line cook, now living under a different name in Darwin, had come forward. His voice cracked as he reached for the past, recalling something he'd buried deep. He had stayed late one night in the week before Owen vanished, cleaning pans in silence when he heard a soft clicking from beneath the floorboards of the prep room. He'd ignored it, until he swore he saw the edge of a shadow slip beneath the cold storage door. Just a flicker. No source. No person. "Owen saw it too," he said. "He told me the restaurant was breathing at night." He broke down as he gave Detective Parrish a folded napkin, one Owen had once scrawled on in sharp, urgent strokes. "The fire isn't leaving. It's watching. Hold it, or be taken." Lena took the napkin in gloved hands, heart pounding. because that same phrase had already been found once carved into the underside of the rooftop railing, invisible unless the light hit just right. Owen had left behind more than a disappearance. He had left behind a warning. And still, with every new clue, the mystery tightened like a noose around the truth. For Parrish, patterns began to emerge, stitched together from the unraveling threads of testimony and time. She revisited the building's blueprints and found anomalies, sealed crawl spaces that didn't match any construction permits, strange pockets of space behind walls that had no doors. A thermal imaging scan of the apartment above Owen's revealed one such void, roughly 3 meters wide, cold as the grave inside. When the team opened it, they expected rodents or mold. What they found instead left them silent. A sliver of mirror edging, scorched at one side and engraved faintly with Owen's initials OH. It was propped against the wall, facing a strip of blackened wallpaper, and behind it, the faint scratching of symbols etched in what looked like carbon. They matched the chef's handwriting. And there, barely visible unless held under ultraviolet light, 7 final words. If I see it again, I disappear. The discovery set off a spiral of reinvestigation, and yet strangely it never made headlines beyond a brief, buried mention in local print. Parrish petitioned for further excavation, but permission was denied by the building's new owner, citing structural safety concerns. Weeks later, when the investigative team returned with legal clearance and backup, the apartment had already been gutted by fire. No accelerants were found, no initial cause determined, just flame wild, consuming, precise. Fire crews reported that it burned hottest in the crawl space, where the mirror had stood. Everything was gone, all but one thing. In the ash near where the mirror had rested, they found a single shard of glass, edge glowing faintly as if still holding heat, and etched once again with the phrase, "Hold the fire." Parrish held the fragment in her palm, hand trembling. Somewhere in the wreckage, in the silence that comes when answers disintegrate into questions, she realized this was never about one man's disappearance. It was about what he had seen, what still watched, and the legacy of smoke it left behind. By early 2024, whispers of the case spread beyond Sydney, catching the attention of a freelance investigative journalist named Callum Dreher, known for his unflinching dives into unsolved mysteries. He'd once exposed corruption within the Perth Police Board and had a rare gift for turning folklore into forensic timelines. Dreher contacted Mara and Parrish, asking one thing: access. What he found, buried in the chaos of old files, discarded Polaroids, and redacted reports, sent him spiraling down an obsession of his own. One photograph from the original investigation, never released to the public, showed the rooftop the morning after Owen vanished, blanketed with frost so thick it shimmered like glass. But in the corner, near the handprint, was something no one had ever noted. A line of footprints, barefoot, narrow, and heading toward the ledge, and then veering sharply, impossibly, left, mid-step, just vanishing. No footprints beyond that point, as if whatever had made them didn't fall, didn't fly, just stopped being. Dreher penned in the margin, entity, pattern, human absence doesn't equate to human choice. Compelled by the impossible footprints, Dreher retraced Owen's final steps on a frigid July morning, standing alone atop the same rooftop where 20 years of questions had gathered like storm clouds. The city groaned softly below, indifferent and eternal. Dreher stared at the ledge, then the wall where the handprint had been. Nothing remained now, just concrete, scrubbed clean, indifferent as sky. But something else caught his eye. A seam along the rooftop's edge, almost imperceptible. When pressed, the stone gave a soft groan and shifted, revealing a hollow no more than a meter deep. Inside, lined in soot and old copper wiring, lay a crushed voice recorder, half melted, still warm despite the winter air. Parrish had it analyzed. Only one playable snippet survived, distorted yet unmistakable. Owen's voice, breathless and trembling. "This isn't death. It's waiting. Between the bricks, Between the fire and the breath, tell Mara don't follow. The message ended with a fragile static, like a match being struck in a void. That night, Parrish called Mara. It's still here, she said quietly. And for the first time in 2 decades, Mara didn't board the plane to Sydney. She just whispered one word across the line, like a prayer or a warning. Enough. But the story, like scorched parchment, refused to end there. A week after Mara's whispered surrender, a maintenance worker named Ellis Grant reported strange irregularities in the electrical grid of the Surry Hills block. Intermittent power surges, systems rebooting to audio settings, all clustered around one fixed timestamp, 12:03 a.m. He dismissed it at first, until the circuits began looping a sound through the building's outdated intercom system, only ever heard by those awake in the exact minute of its arrival. A soft scratching, then whispers, fragments of rain, someone somewhere, breathing slow and close. When confronted, building management sealed the speaker systems and decommissioned the old rooftop panels. And yet, Parrish received an anonymous envelope weeks later. No name, no return. Inside, a single Polaroid, new, crisp, taken from the perspective of someone on the edge of the rooftop, looking inward, not out. Captured in the background, faint and half-formed, a silhouette behind the rooftop door, as if someone had just opened it, as if someone had just stepped back inside. The photo was signed, barely legible under the overexposed glare of flash. O.H. And on the reverse, one more line scrawled in charcoal, I held the fire. It held me back. For now. In the weeks that followed, silence returned to Surry Hills, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the stillness before something breaks. Detective Parrish, now a woman haunted more by memories than evidence, kept the Polaroid locked in her desk drawer, face down, the message etched into her bones like an unfinished sentence. She no longer visited the rooftop, nor did Mara call. It was as if both women knew a boundary had been crossed, that some mysteries, once glimpsed, do not grant the privilege of retreat. And yet, late one night, a final spark, quiet, almost imperceptible, slipped into the digital case archive. A single file, no sender, no trace. It contained only 7 seconds of slow, rhythmic breathing, overlaid with a whisper, not of fear, but resolve. It's not fire, it's the space between light. And it sees when we see it. Then came a low hum, rising, falling, like something waiting just beneath the skin of the world. The case remained open. But those who truly listened, those who still stood in the fallout of embers and unanswered farewells, understood Owen Harding was never just taken. He was shown something, and whatever it was, it never left that rooftop. It waits, still, in the cold corners of midnight, for the next flicker, for the next fire, for someone new to see. Years later, with the city's skyline unchanged but the names on its lips forever shifting, whispers still cling to the brick-laced corners of Commonwealth Street like smoke that refuses to rise. Some say the fire was a metaphor, others believe it was a doorway. But every now and then, someone new moves into the old building unaware of its layered history, its trapped breath. And always, always there comes a moment, unspoken and uneventful, when they wake at 12:03 a.m. to a silence too sharp, a cold too sudden, a shadow across a wall that shouldn't hold a shadow. The official reports now gather dust in archival basements, but the case lives on beyond them, replicated in whisper, in dream, in static. And on rain-slicked nights, when the air smells faintly of burnt rosemary and old copper, those who pass Ember Ash's remains often quicken their pace. Because though the door is rusted shut and the rooftop long sealed, they say that if you listen close at just the right hour, you can still hear a voice, not crying for help, but warning, steady and slow. Hold the fire, not a plea, a promise, a map, and always a price. And yet, the final page waited to turn. In June of 2025, as renovations were quietly approved to convert the old building into luxury apartments. Construction crews unearthed something hidden deep beneath the foundation, buried behind layers of sand and concrete, where no blueprint claimed anything should be. It was a door, old, iron, sealed with rivets and tar. When pried open by welders, it led not to a basement, but to a hollow chamber, circular and cavernously empty. The walls bore scorched fingerprints, dozens, perhaps hundreds, looping in spirals that mirrored the symbols Owen had etched years before. In the center sat the charred husk of a wooden chair, blackened like a pyre's end, and beside it, a single object, a chef's coat, folded precisely, as if laid down with reverence. Its left sleeve shimmered faintly, revealing embroidery worn yet visible. 2 words, uneven and trembling but unmistakable. I stayed. The fire marshal declared the chamber structurally unsafe, and it was sealed within days. But those who entered spoke of the scent not of ash, but of cold rain and cracked time. And in that moment, amid the murk of light and shadow, it became undeniably clear. Owen hadn't disappeared. He had descended into something that watched. And for reasons no one would ever be able to explain, not with forensics, not with science, not with faith, he had stayed. The rooftop was empty again, but the story burned on. But even burning stories leave cinders. In a quiet exhibit hall at the State Library of New South Wales, tucked beside ancient scrolls and forgotten memoirs, a new display appeared without fanfare in August of 2025. Its title, Vanishing Point, The Rooftop Echoes of Owen Harding. Behind thick glass, the items sat like relics from a myth: Owen's engraved knife, the Polaroid photograph, a transcript of his final voice message. No explanations. Just a note, artifacts recovered from an ongoing case, interpretation left to the beholder. Visitors pause longer here than anywhere else. Some wipe away tears they can't quite explain. Others stare too long at the photo, unable to unsee the figure near the rooftop door. As they leave, more than a few glance skyward, as though expecting some sound or signal to follow. But the rooftop, visible beyond the west windows, remains still. Whether sanctuary or snare, it holds its silence fiercely. And somewhere, perhaps buried beneath walls or whispered within dreams, a voice endures, not lost, not afraid, merely patient, waiting for the next kindling of belief, waiting for someone else to look too closely at the edge and wonder what lies just beyond the light. Some stories end with a solved case, a gavel's echo, or a name returned from the missing to the remembered. But Owen Harding's story refuses such formality. It lingers not in files or timelines, but in the fleeting quiet between breaths, in the cold flicker of a rooftop light that should have burned out years ago. The chef who turned fire into art became a myth not of triumph, but of warning. And somewhere, beneath the polished floors of future apartments, or within the dreams of those who linger too long on the 6th floor, that warning still simmers. Hold the fire. Maybe it means resist. Maybe it means remember. Or maybe, in the end, it is the last thing we say before the shadows reply. And now, as the city prepares to build over the past once more, what remains of Owen Harding is not evidence, but echo. Not answer, but presence. Still watching, still waiting, still whispering in the breathless hour before dawn. But what haunts most is not the facts, not the theories, not even the heat-stained remnants Owen left behind. It's the feeling. The feeling that something ancient and human, raw and grieving, stirs within that story. That a man who mastered heat and hunger was taken not because he feared the dark, but because he sought its meaning. And maybe, just maybe, Owen Harding stepped onto that rooftop not to escape, not to end, but to confront. To answer something only he could hear in the rain, in the breath, in the silence. Now, decades on, his story remains not in headlines or hearings, but in moments that split second, when power flickers, when you hear a creak with no cause, when you feel watched though you're alone. And in those moments you may hear it too. Not a ghost, not a monster, but a whisper, soft and knowing. Hold the fire, a farewell, a warning, a beginning. And so the story circles back to where it began, not with an answer but an echo, not a rooftop but a threshold. Long after headlines fade and buildings forget, stories like Owen Harding slip into the collective marrow of a place. They become the quiet rules no one writes down, the streets to never walk alone, the hours to never stay awake. Yet for those drawn to ember over comfort, to shadow over certainty, his voice remains, caught forever in that space between silence and sound. Hold the fire. The words drift not as legend, but as legacy. A flickering reminder that some vanishings are not losses, but transformations. And in the mystery's heat, Owen's truth still burns, waiting, watching, whispering not to be solved, but to be understood. Not an ending, just the pause before the next story begins. Years from now, when the last stone of the old Surry Hills building has been replaced by glass and chrome, and the city's rumble drowns out every whisper of history, something will still remain unseen, unnamed, unanswered. Not in files or forgotten artifacts, but in the stillness that creeps into certain corners at night, in the scent of time fluttering unexpectedly through sealed vents, in the flicker of a rooftop light that turns on, despite no visible wiring. And perhaps, in quiet kitchens where fire dances too long before dimming, a name will bubble to the surface of someone's thoughts with no reason. Owen. Not a haunting, not a lie, just presence. A trace in the architecture of fear and longing. And when that presence speaks again, it will not scream or demand or warn. It will simply whisper as embers do when they settle, as voices do when they've told all they can. Hold the fire, then silence, then breath, then, always, the beginning of something waiting to be seen once more. Outside the old building's gates, a bronze plaque has been newly installed by the city, part of a heritage initiative neither Mara Harding nor Detective Parrish ever signed off on. It reads, Site of Ember Ash, home of Chef Owen Harding, 1970, 6 to 2003. Occupied by stories unseen, the words feel sanitized, too careful, distant from the truth those who remember still carry in scars and sleep. Yet behind them, something hums. A story held not in the walls, but in the absence they left behind. And when strangers pass the gate, children tugging at parents' hands, architects inspecting blueprints, a couple pondering a first home, they sometimes glance up, confused by a feeling they can't explain. A prickling at the neck, a warmth that rushes and recedes, and though they don't know his name, or the whispers, or the fire, they pause just a moment too long, then walk on. But Owen Harding's legacy does not ask to be known. It waits silent and constant like heat in stones long cooled, like breath behind glass. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just presence, always, and the whisper that will never need to be spoken again. Hold the fire. In time, what remains of Owen Harding's story may no longer be spoken aloud, but that does not mean it will fade. It will drift, as such stories do, into the marrow of place and myth, into the quiet knowing that surrounds certain rooftops and certain hours. The plaque will tarnish, the scent will fade, the blueprints will shift until no trace of the old foundation is left. And yet, for those who stop beneath that skyline, who glance up without knowing why, something will stir, a reverent unease, a stillness between streetlight flickers. They will not know they are standing where a man once vanished into fire and breath and silence, but they will feel it, and somewhere, far beneath and far within, the embers will pulse again, waiting, not for resolution, but recognition. A quiet understanding that some vanishings are not closed chapters, they are open calls. And perhaps one night, in that thin hour just before dawn, someone will hear the whisper not with fear, but with belonging. Hold the fire and know, without knowing how, that they already are. And perhaps that is how his story will last, not as fire, but as warmth rediscovered in the hearts of those who feel too much and question too deeply. Not as a warning, but as a mirror for the dark corners we all carry, where memory bleeds into belief. Owen Harding vanished from a rooftop in Sydney, but the truth of him, his voice, his fear, his courage to peer into the unseeable remains written in the unseen architecture of our world. And so, when the wind grazes through the city just right, curling through alleyways like a whispered name, and somewhere, far above, a rooftop light flickers and flares before going still again, we might remember without remembering why. Because some stories are not written to be finished. They are meant to be carried, quietly, gently, like flame in cupped hands, like breath before the leap, like these final words that will never fade, hold the fire. And perhaps that is enough. Not closure, but continuity, not finality, but flame passed quietly from one soul to the next, without spectacle or explanation. In kitchens where the burners still hiss to life, in buildings that wear the invisible fingerprints of time, the essence of Owen Harding lingers. A man who vanished, yes, but who did not disappear entirely. He held the fire. It marked him. It guided him. And now it reaches out not to take, but to touch. To remind us that behind every locked door, every breathless pause, every silence heavy with memory, there may reside not an ending, but the presence of something deeply human. A longing, a choice, a whisper. And if we lean in, hearts open and unafraid, we might just hear it once more, not as terror, but as invitation. Not as myth, but as inheritance. Hold the fire. And so the flame endures, not burning outward, but glowing inward within those who've brushed against the echo Owen Harding left behind. What began as a simple rooftop disappearance became a mythology inscribed in stillness, in breath, in the moment just before everything changes. People walk past the old site now, unaware of the name or the warnings, but some feel it an ache with no source, a warmth with no fire, a legacy not etched in plaques but in pulse. He never returned, not in body or form, but in meaning. And perhaps that is the gift the vanished sometimes leave. Not answers, not peace, but presence. A memory born not of facts, but of something older, something shared in the human longing to know, to see, to endure. Owen Harding's story does not ask for belief. It asks for care, for the willingness to notice, to hold the fire not as fear, but as faith. And in doing so, never forget that some lights fade not to die, but to wait for us to see. The story ends as it began quietly, in the hush between knowing and not, where mystery breathes and meaning flickers like the ghost of a flame. There will be no final page, no sealed file, no voice declaring case closed. Instead, there will always be the rooftop, whether in Surry Hills or in the secret architecture of the cities we carry within us, the unseen corridors of grief, wonder, fear. Owen Harding stepped into that space and left behind not a riddle to solve, but a thread to follow for those who listen deeper, who feel the weight of silence, who find meaning in the spaces between light. His was not a disappearance, it was a passage. And now, for those of us still searching rooftops for lost names, or warm kitchens for forgotten voices, his whisper lives on, a whisper not of fire's end, but its beginning. Hold the fire, always. And in that whisper, something both ancient and achingly present survives, not just the story of one vanished man, but the echo of all the questions we are too afraid to ask aloud. Who watches in silence when the lights go out? What flickers behind the veil of normalcy, waiting to be seen? Owen Harding's life, his vanishing, his voice in the dark, it all becomes a symbol, not of fear, but of attention, of the sacred act of noticing. The rooftop is just one place, the fire, one form. But the invitation beckons everywhere in the creak of floorboards, the stillness of a midnight hour, the glint of something familiar in unfamiliar places. Owen's legacy threads through time like smoke curling beneath a locked door, unseen but unmistakable. So when the chill sets in without warning, or the silence deepens too suddenly, you might remember not the man, but the meaning he became. And in that moment, even if only for an instant, hold the fire. not to solve, not to run, but to remain. Because some stories never really end. They echo, they breathe, they transform. Owen Harding may have vanished from the rooftop on that winter night, but he did not vanish from the world's skin. He became something else, a question that won't quiet, a breath that lingers too long, a flickering warmth that returns in midnight kitchens and frost-laced city corners. In every unexplained shadow, in every soft hum beneath the walls, there is still something that waits not cruelly, but curiously. What waits is not a monster or a ghost, but a truth bigger than the moment he disappeared. Something watched, something answered, something stayed, and so too do we, watching the rooftops, listening to the hush between thoughts, waiting, wondering, carrying forward the ember of a name that should never have slipped into silence. Not gone, not lost, just held in that fragile space where stories begin again, and always, always with the same whispered vow, hold the fire. So this, at last, is what lingers, not just the name of Owen Harding, but the shimmer of what it means to disappear without vanishing, to burn without being consumed. His story drifts now across years and streets, across stories told in low voices and eyes that linger too long on rooftops. It lives in the fragile trust we place in waking, in knowing that some shadows are not dangers, but doorways. And for those who carry his echo within them, knowingly or not, the fire is never far. It glows in the pause before a question, in the hush between heartbeats, in the unseen warmth held gently behind every closed door. A man once stepped into the unknown and left behind a map written in breath, silence, and flame. And for those who find themselves listening again, sensing something just beyond knowing, his voice remains not as fear, but as faith, soft and radiant, ever present, and always, with love carved into heat, hold the fire. So let it end not with vanishing, but with returning to the place where silence spoke loudest and breath became story. The rooftop is still there, whether in stone or memory, lit not by answers but by echoes. The city moves on, as cities do, forgetful, yet haunted by what it cannot name. But the fire remains not in flame, not in smoke, but in the ache to know, to feel beyond what is seen. Owen Harding became more than a man the night he disappeared. He became the question left on the lips of time, the warmth that touches a soul just before it slips into dreaming. And perhaps that is all a story hopes to do, not be solved but remembered, not resolved but retold. Somewhere, always, there is a rooftop catching frost and breath. Somewhere the whisper still waits, fiercely quiet, achingly clear. Hold the fire, and in holding it, become part of the story that never ends. And there, in the final flicker between story and silence, something becomes clear not in bright revelation, but in the slow bloom of understanding. Owen Harding did not vanish to escape or to be found. He crossed into mystery to illuminate it, to give shape to the questions that haunt us all. His name, whispered like an ember in cold wind, becomes a signal for those who feel too much, see too far, dream too deeply. Hold the fire, not a command, but a covenant, a lifeline passed from one soul to the next, across time, across doubt, across rooftops swept clean by 20 winters. And as breath meets frost and memory meets myth, the story closes its circle not with certainty, but with meaning. So let him remain, not lost, but luminous, not gone, but glowing, a presence in the quiet, a touch in the unknown, and always, always the whisper that endures, hold the fire,